Right. Hello, everyone. Psychopathology prep for 2025. The last section of paper one. Um, Only 5 bullet points, and to be honest, one of those is very very short. The second one, um, it, but it actually three of the bullet points essentially contain 6 bullet points worth of information. So you've got definitions. So you need to know the 4 definitions. That's a huge problem area for students. They cannot differentiate between them. You're going to need to know the specific evaluations and criteria for each of them, and that takes time. And then you've got behavioural approach to explaining and treating phobias, the cognitive approach to explaining and treating depression, and then the biological approach for both explaining and treating OCD. So there's essentially 6 bullet points worth of information. You may get asked about the explanations, you may get asked about the treatments, or you may get asked about either or all of them, or both of them. So let's start with predictions, of which there are none. Okay, everything's come up within 3 years, so there's no obvious candidates. I always go straight to 16 markers. You can't really get a 16 marker in characteristics of disorders. You can't really get, you can't evaluate the character. It is a fact that anxiety is a characteristic of depression, for example. You can't evaluate that. Worst you can get would be, I guess, an 8 marker. That would be AO1 and AO2. That's possible, I guess, but I think it's unlikely. Where if a 60 marker comes up, where you're going to get them will be definitions, phobias, depression, or OCD. OCD has never had a 16 marker. It's had 2 8 markers, but it's never had a 16 marker. Despite the fact for explanations, there is more than enough they can go for there. And I might just dip into that a little bit. Now, I probably will be filming a much more full video, sort of like an hour and a half type video going through this, if you can bear to watch a video this long of me. But like I say, no clear predictions. But what I do want to start with is that first bullet point. 260 markers have come up before. I think both of them are 646 essays, which come up quite often with this. My main worry about this one would be students are usually terrible at differentiating between those two ones. They get statistical frequency, though they don't always get all of it, and they're okay with deviation from ideal mental health. But they often say things like, failure to function adequately is when you don't live up to society's expectations. And whilst that's kind of true, it's also very much bordering on the deviation from social norms element. So you're going to need to do some work to split those two. Now, what I say to students is each of these have a different foci, a different focus, right? So of what abnormality actually is. So statistical frequency is rarity, right? I think these are quite important words to be able to write down because it's going to help you separate the 4 ones. So statistical infrequency is about rarity of behavior. Abnormality is not bad. It's not a negative thing. It's not something to fix, right? Abnormality is just simply a statistically rare behavior. And so you want to come at it from that perspective. It's a rare behavior. Failure to function adequately is all about distress. It's all about distress. So you're abnormal because you are overly stressed and you are causing people discomfort and you are probably quite unconventional. And it's all those kind of criteria that are in between. So failure to function adequately is when you are in some sort of psychological distress. And again, you'd want to be coming from that direction. Deviation from social norms is all about expectations. So whether or not you build those expectations. So again, distress and expectations are completely different. So make sure that you are actually differentiating between those definitions. And deviation from ideal mental health is all about psychological well-being. So that's kind of linked to distress a little bit, and there is a little bit of intertwining between them. But you want to come in from if you do not have psychological well-being, you are abnormal. Each of them, you want to think about, are they subjective? So all of them, but statistical and frequency are subjective. Statistical and frequency is the only objective one. So again, why is that bad? It takes somebody's opinion to define abnormality. Opinions can be wrong, even with trained professionals. The other thing to keep in mind, is it the same across all cultures? So again, deviation from social norms is not the same across all cultures. And then give a couple of examples off the top of my head. Let's have a think. Sitting on tables is incredibly offensive in New Zealand. Sitting on tables is incredibly offensive. It's really frowned upon in New Zealand. So on the one hand, this definition says that abnormality is completely different for each culture, but it's taking into account culture, and that's fantastic. So there are two evaluations you probably want to think of at the top of your head. Is it objective or subjective? Is it culturally relevant and culturally relative? And is it offensive? Deviation from ideal mental health kind of says that we're all abnormal, really, and that actually normality is not a thing we're likely going to achieve. And that's not a particularly nice thing to hear. So again, if it's not offensive, then that's just as valuable as a evaluation point. So yeah, you're going to have to really. So I keep wiping my nose. I'm not particularly well, but you're not particularly. Yeah, you just have to be aware of that, I think. The other thing just to keep in mind as well, I think, is OCD. So OCD is typically students' worst, maybe one of their worst ones, because it's really, really technical. Now, it's all biological, obviously, but be careful of this. I don't think students revise this particularly well, partly because they just get genetic and neural explanations mixed up. So there is one genetic explanation, that is genetic. So know what are the candidate genes. Faulty COMT gene, faulty CERT gene, and know what they do. You're going to need to know how those genes work. So know what they do. You've got up to 3 neural explanations. So you've got the rapid serotonin reuptake issue, right? There is a correlation between people with OCD and them having a rapid reuptake of serotonin. You've also got the correlation with Lyme's disease, throat infections, and the flu. There is a correlation neurally between getting those disorders in some people and the rapid onset of what we call pandas. Now, I don't think this explanation is always taught, but feel free to have a look at my slides. I will try to remember to attach them to this video. If not, then please tell me. But you need to link that neural explanation of getting those disorders and the onset of pandas OCD. And then you finally got a misfiring caudate nucleus. That explains this this going round. So I've got the genetic one just here. Fine. You've got a few statistics there, and feel free to pause this video if you want to write down any of this, but you've got a few statistics there for genes. March and Benton, Lewis, for example. You've got Neshtat et al. As well. So there's a few good pieces of research that you could talk about for genes. You've got Taylor et al., who only about sort of 10, 12 years ago established, sorry, don't mind me, that OCD is quite polygenic. So again, loads of pieces of research. Candidate genes, cert and comp gene. If you want to do well in this question, you're going to have to tell the examiner what those genes do. So cert gene is responsible for the normal transportation of serotonin across the synapse. When that misfires, or when that becomes faulty, serotonin works in different ways, and at a behavioural level, that's thought to cause OCD. I'm not going to go through. You've got rapid serotonin reuptake, you've got neural explanations just here. So throat infections, Lyme's disease, the flu, they sort of potentially cause an onset of pandas. It's this one just here that I want to go through just very briefly. I haven't brushed my teeth since this morning. It's late on a Sunday night. I haven't brushed my teeth since this morning. I can feel my teeth feel quite minging now. They feel quite disgusting, right? That is my orbital frontal cortex. You need a part of your brain to tell you what the problem is. You've got dirty hands. You've got dirty teeth. You smell like you've been living in a jungle for the last 15 days. You need a part of your, I don't know where that example come from. You need a part of your brain to tell you what the problem is, and that is the orbital frontal cortex. Now, in neurotypical people, that works fine. We pass the problem to the cingulate gyrus, and the cingulate gyrus says, well, if your hands are dirty, you need to wash your hands, and so then you do. Now, in everyone, that usually works fine. In people with OCD, that works fine. In people without OCD, that also works fine. The problem comes in people with OCD when the cingulate gyrus says, right, you've finished that job now. Right, you've finished that job. You want to gear shift. You want to move on. Right, you've moved on to something else now. You've dry your hands. That's the next job. But in people with OCD, that then misfires, and it sends people back on the loop, going between their problem detection solution, and it goes round and round and round and round. And this is why people with OCD struggle to gear shift. They struggle to move on because their caudate nucleus misfires. It's not completely broken, because eventually they'll go, okay, right, it feels right now, I can move on. The reason why this explanation is, in my opinion, the best is because you've got orbital frontal cortex, cingulate gyrus, caudate nucleus, and gear shifting. There are 4 good terms, 3 of them quite specific parts of the brain, and yet it's an easy explanation to kind of explain with an easy example. So you sound like a proper academic badass. So I think it's a really, really good cost-benefit explanation. You just need to get those terms right, get them in the right order, and you can pick up quite a lot of marks. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit because this is not my longer video. The only other thing that I'm a bit worried about is Beck and Ellis. Students get phobias. They're a walk in the park. You probably don't need that much revision on phobias. Maybe know the terms of the 2-process model. But the far bigger problem is cognitive explanations for depression. So you need to know Beck and Ellis, but you cannot go for just Beck's negative triad. It's so basic. What happens if they hit you with a 16 marker on Beck? If you just know the triad, you are screwed, because there is nowhere near enough there. So you want to be talking about the deeper parts of Beck's theory. And again, sorry, I'm not very well. Deal with it. No, sorry, it's too weird. You need to know those deeper parts of the Beck's theory. So cognitive triad, absolutely talk about cognitive triad, right? Absolutely, right? It is a valuable part of it. Maybe use an example, I think I'm ugly, and that's naturally going to lead to, well, if I think I'm ugly, everyone else thinks I'm ugly. Of course, why would they not? If I think I'm ugly, I'm not going to go, but everyone thinks I'm beautiful. That 1A doesn't lead to B there. So if I think I'm ugly, then everyone thinks I'm ugly. And of course, if everyone thinks I'm ugly, they're always going to think I'm ugly. Because why would they just think I'm ugly now? Oh, he's ugly now, but he's probably going to be beautiful. No, no. If I think I'm ugly, everyone thinks I'm ugly, and that naturally leads to, in the future, well, everyone's always going to think I'm ugly. Do you know why? Because I'm ugly. And it goes round and round and round. Talk about the triad, absolutely. But you want to be talking about this idea about self-schemas, and how schemas fuel and are fueled by, in a reciprocal nature, cognitive biases. So I've got some self schemas here. I've got some cognitive biases here. Now they fuel each other in the same similar way that the negative biases does. But what you also want to be talking about are errors in logic. So what are some of the thinking errors? So Beck identified a number of these sort of errors in logic. You don't need to know all of them. Dichotomous thinking, the fifth one, the bottom one, is a big one. But you want to be taught. Don't just talk about Beck's triad. Now, one thing you want to be aware of is, could they ask you to give similarities and or differences with Beck and Ellis? 100%. Right? I think that it wouldn't be a 16 marker, but it could be an 8 marker. I put this into Gemini just to give some suggestions, and it's given loads of suggestions. To be honest, most of them similarities, right? Most of them similarities. Both focus on the present, so both theories and treatments are not massively. They're saying, right, you're thinking shit, right? But let's not worry about that. Let's change that for the present. So both of them kind of think about that. Both of them believe that it is irrational thinking that causes depression, but in slightly different ways. I do have some treatments down, some differences down here, but I don't think they're particularly good, which means I don't think you're going to get asked about differences. Anyway, that's the basics, right? That is the basics. That is what we're dealing with here. Hard to know where this is coming from. Last year it was 24 out of 24 marks were on psychopathology, but there was hardly any the year before, comparatively. So yeah, they're the main focus points, I think. Definitions, explanations for OCD, and explanations for depression. You're going to need to know that technical language, that especially with OCD. All right. As always, hope this is useful. I will film a longer one, and I promise I will be less snotty next time. So hope this is useful.